Good evening. Can I tell you a coronavirus joke? Or is it too never mind. You probably won't get it.
Good. I didn't want it anyway.
You need a little levity, right? I'm all tired of being pinned in. I see a lot of familiar faces. I see a lot of new faces. I see some of my students. I put them to work as soon as they got here. They were passing out pocket declarations and constitutions. I buy them in bulk. So if you didn't get one, come see me. I still have a bunch in the box. I'll let you decide after you're done listening to me wax on. But I'll make the offer now. If any of you are homeschool parents, grandparents, I'm happy to lend my services in any way I can. If you have a co-op, I taught a couple classes at the co-op at the Assembly Church in Sandpoint. We haven't been outlawed yet. Anyway, I leave that out there as an offer. Feel free to say I'm crazy when we're done and pass, or call me, and my phone number is on the back of all those constitutions. I do a lot of asking of questions, and my students will tell you this. That's how I teach. I need to get up. I don't usually raise the microphone. That's nice.
Sure. Little microphone.
I could yell.
Thank you, Jared. You're up.
Thank you, sir. Is that better?
Yeah.
All right. You want me to tell a joke again?
We got it.
All right. I have others, but we're in church. I can't tell them. My students can tell you that I teach by asking a lot of questions. Some people call it the Socratic method. I don't care, whatever you want to call it. But I ask questions. I make you find the answer. Sometimes it's, baked into the question. So let me ask you this. Why do we establish governments? Is government inherently bad?
No.
Where can we find some guidance on answering that question? Well, we can look at the Declaration of Independence, right? That tells us that governments are instituted among men for what purpose? To secure our rights, our unalienable rights. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. The Constitution, the United States Constitution, also gives us an instruction in the preamble, right? We form governments in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for common defense, promote general welfare, and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Those are pretty high causes. Even Idaho's Constitution addresses this. It says government, this is the Article 1, Section 2. Government is instituted for the equal protection and benefit of the people. That's us. And they have, that's us, they have the right to alter, reform, or abolish the same whenever they, that's us, deem it necessary. That sounds kind of familiar, right? If you've read the Declaration, they plagiarized a bit. So what else might we, in a more practical sense, why might we form government? Well, we all have these unalienable rights, and they're floating around, and every now and again, they collide, right?
Butt heads.
So whose unalienable rights are superior to whose? Are yours more important than mine, or vice versa? Good government can step into the breach and resolve those conflicts. Not always well, it's not a perfect system, but ideally there's a neutral arbiter to resolve those conflicts. What's the best relationship? What's the proper relationship between citizens and their governments? You think we'd all agree on that in this room? I don't think there's probably a consensus, but we all get the gist of it. What's the American system of government? How does it differ from every other system in history? The history of, ever. Never done before, never done since. We're one of a kind. What was the original design of our government, our national government? How has it evolved or devolved? Is it still the way it was originally designed? Is it functioning that way?
Very.
For those of us who are Christians, what are our duties with respect to civil government? Anybody read Romans 13? It's a good way to start a fight in a bar, right? Those are fight words, right? For those of us who embrace freedom, Romans 13 kind of gets our Irish up a little bit. I'm going to read it, okay? I'm not a preacher, so bear with me. I'm not going to give you a sermon. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be, that's where that little phrase comes from, are ordained by God, of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Ouch. Right? That's pretty serious. This is Paul writing to the Christians in Rome, right? He had the deacon Phoebe, that's my little daughter, deliver the epistle to the Christians in Rome. Romans 13:3, for rulers are not a terror to good works. They're not supposed to be, right? But to the evil. Wilt thou then be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore you must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Now, let that sink in for just a second before you throw something at me. Take it up with Paul. I didn't write it. But it tells us, right, we are subject to earthly powers.
Yep.
If God didn't want them here, he'd probably take them away. Or maybe there's a lesson to be learned in bad powers, right? How about Matthew 22? Jesus is always being challenged, you know? Those pesky Pharisees. Tell us, therefore, what thinkest thou? He's being baited, right? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? Trick question, right?
Yep.
Who best to answer it?
Give to God what is
Not me.
God, and to Caesar what is
But
Caesar.
Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? You always know when you see hypocrites, there's a Pharisee somewhere in the storyline. Right? Show me the tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny. And he said unto them, whose is this image and superscription? And they say unto him, Caesar's. Then saith he unto them, render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's.
Amen.
Right.
We have a relationship with government, right? Our Caesars, they come in all shapes and sizes. Some look like Heather. Some look like Governor
Ooh.
Little comma Brad, is that what the typo was? Little Brad, as he's affectionately referred to in some circles. But we also get some guidance from the Declaration of Independence. And I got to tell you, I think I'm a bigger fan of that than the Constitution. It's relatively short, but my family every Independence Day busts it out and reads it because, you know, kind of a big deal. It tells us a little bit about who we are as a nation and why we got here. And the Declaration says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, that is, securing our unalienable rights, it is the right of the people, that's us, to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall deem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Pause. All right, we get to bust it up and throw the rascals out, right? But wait, there's more. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. So just because we're mad today, that's not sufficient, okay? This is probably I think the most prescient, wise clause in the entire Declaration. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. That's our present dilemma, isn't it? We get complacent with the familiar, even if the familiar is broken or defective. And we just can't always bring ourselves to fix it. It's too much, it's too big. Washington, D.C. is so far away. But let me tell you, if you're a student of the Bible and you're a student of history, you'll quickly figure out that slavery has always been the natural order of things.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just the slavery of colonial America, right? The Bible is riddled with slavery. In fact, there are others who probably know the Bible better than me. I'm not quite sure there's a strict prohibition in there. We don't tend to promote that idea in the United States, thankfully. But freedom, self-governance, self-determination, those have not been the natural order of things for the history of mankind. That's tough. Takes a lot of work. The Declaration also says, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them, that's us, under absolute despotism, it is their right, ours, it is their duty, ours, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Let that one sink in for a minute. Not only do you have the right to toss the bums out, you have a duty. To whom do you owe a duty? Clearly not to the bums, right? Not to the government. Maybe to ourselves, but I don't think so. I think our duty is at a higher altitude.
To God.
I had a chuckle. I used the restroom downstairs before. I started tonight, and there's a little sign, a little placard on the wall down there that says, "When in doubt, look up." I'm gonna get that tattooed right there on my wrist. Our duty to throw off such government is a duty to God, not a duty to government or a country or even to ourselves. Our choice to throw off such government would not only require a declaration of the cause is, it might impel us to do so, right, a la the Declaration, as merely a demonstration of respect to the opinions of mankind. No, it would require demonstrating that our choice to throw off such government would be acceptable in the eyes of God. A somewhat higher standard, it would seem. Okay, deep breath for the gasp. Lest we forget, United States of America appears nowhere in the Bible. That's a fact worth remembering. When you get your knickers all twisted,
We ain't gonna be
look up.
around.
I have that constant problem, just so you know. All right. That's a little context for that relationship. What's expected of us as Americans, as Christians, in a world that is now very much dominated by enormous government.
Chaos.
Does anybody know the current total of just federal government employees? It's 3 million or so. Do you know how many federal government employees there were in 1776, 1787, right? Yeah, not much. I'm going to share a recipe. We've got some cooks in the audience. I call it the American cake. Sounds clever. 5 essential ingredients. If you have ever baked a cake and you leave out an ingredient, it's just not the same, is it? They complain, you yell at them to eat it, they complain some more, but it's just not the same cake. Well, in America, as I like to say, there are 5 ingredients to our cake. You take one out, it isn't American anymore. Number 1, unalienable rights. Number 2, all political power is inherent in the people. Number 3, a republican form of government. Number 4, the U.S. Constitution, not just a constitution. Lots of countries have those. And number 5, limited government. I'll drink some water and then I'm going to elaborate. What are unalienable rights? Unalienable. Can't take them away. Because why? Because they're from God. Right? Don't take my word for it. It's in that little book I handed out. Those are individual rights for people. Us. People who are created in God's image. What is bestowed upon us by God cannot be taken away by any man or any God. Period. Full stop. Everybody clear on that? Okay, cool. What does the first sentence of the Declaration of Independence say?
We the people? We the
That's the Constitution, but close.
Oh.
When the course is executed and
It become necessary.
It's just a sentence. It refers to this clever little phrasing, the laws of nature and of nature's God. Mother Nature and Easter bunnies and Easter eggs, right? No. What does that phrase mean? In 1776, that phrase was widely understood. The best explanation and maybe the best attribution of that phrase is to a fellow named Lord Viscount Bolingbroke. He wrote a letter to a little fellow, 4'6". You may have heard of him. He was a poet, Alexander Pope. He just explained what that phrase meant, and every founder and framer was familiar with the work of Lord Bolingbroke. He was a prolific thinker, political thinker, and was very well known during the Enlightenment period. He died shortly before the Declaration. He said in his letter to Pope, not the Pope, the little guy, Alexander Pope, "You will find that it is the modest, not the presumptuous inquirer, who makes a real and safe progress in the discovery of divine truths." Divine truths. One follows nature and nature's God. That is, he follows God in his works and in his word. In other words, maybe less eloquent, the laws of God's works are the laws of nature as expressed by all of creation. Well, the sun comes up,
The sun
the
goes
sun
down.
goes down. The seasons change. Well, at least around here they sure do. Maybe not in Hawaii. So. It takes a man and a woman to conceive a child. I don't care how clever we think we are. That is a law of God as expressed in creation. It's not going to change. It's not a political statement, that's a factual one. the law of God's word, well, that's in the Bible, right? So we have two sources. We look at the world around us, and we find truth in the laws of creation, absolutes. That little nagging conscience you have, right and wrong, where do you think that came from? Your parents?
Nope.
You haven't met mine. It comes from God. We are His creation, and it is built in.
Right.
It's part of our individual machines. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator, not Mother Nature, with certain unalienable rights. You all know that language, right? Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Even the Idaho Constitution. You can sense a little sarcasm every time I refer to it. Article 1, Section 1. The first sentence of the Idaho Constitution is captioned inalienable rights of man. So for anybody who gave Heather grief for spelling unalienable wrong, it's not her fault. Idaho spelled it wrong. I'm sorry. All men are by nature, creation,
Created by God.
are by nature free and equal, and have certain inalienable rights, among which are enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, pursuing happiness, and securing safety. See a theme here? We have these rights. They're unalienable. They're cooked into us. They come from God. It's not complicated. Number 2, all political power is inherent in the people. Who are the people?
Us.
We have it more specifically. The citizens. That's an important distinction. Excuse me, a distinction we're going to talk about in the next ingredient. But it is inherent in the citizens, not the non-citizens. For good reason. Political power, think about Romans for a second, comes from God. It resides in us, and we delegate it periodically, sometimes foolishly, to our governments. That's how it works. Just remember that, hand and arm signals, right? I saw somebody with the first cab hat. You know how to do hand and arm signals. Everybody needs a ground guide. We, the people of the United States, do, ellipsis, starts with we, the people of the United States in the preamble, and it ends with do ordain and establish this Constitution. We're setting up a government. Who is? We, the people, the citizens. We're getting together and we're making a deal, right? It is a social compact, a contract between and among the people of the land, the citizens, okay? Think about that for a minute. Who created the government? Did the government create the government? Of course not. That's absurd. We did. It's ours. You've heard that a couple of times tonight, right? Also, it's worth noting, Declaration, well, it was formally issued July 4th, but it wasn't really signed by anybody until August 2nd, little known fact. It's hot in the summer and mosquitoes and all that.
No air conditioning.
And there's a little battle going on. We finally got a constitution, the first one in 1781. It was ratified by the 13 states, right? Articles of Confederation. So 5 years later, before we got any kind of a constitution, we were still American, right? We didn't get what we know as the U.S. Constitution. It wasn't ratified until 1787. Do you know it wasn't until 1790 that Rhode Island ratified the thing? 1790. 1791, December, we finally get what's called the Bill of Rights. Kind of a misnomer. Right? So the Bill of Rights didn't come till more than 15 years after the country was founded. We forget that sometimes. We think of we the people as the founding document, but it's not. It was, second time it didn't play. Article 1, Section 2, as I said, makes clear that the Idaho Constitution that all political power is inherent in the people. It says it explicitly. So I think we're pretty solid on that one. Republican form of government. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, you should all have it. Don't take my word for it, it's in there. The United States, the federal government that is, shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government. I can assure you, notwithstanding what Google will tell you, the word democracy does not appear in the Constitution, nor in the Declaration.
It's not a democracy,
What's the
it's a
difference
republic.
between a republic and a democracy? A lot. I have to laugh, and I cry. I think it's Fox News has their, banner for the 2020 elections, and it says Democracy 2020. What? Shame on them. No, it's just that's like Nancy Reagan said, just say no. Occasionally, we do misbehave and act like a democracy, right? School levies, those always end well for the folks, right? I can give you millions and millions of reasons why democracy can be bad. Referenda, ballot initiatives, all variety. That's democracy. When you vote on a single issue, that's democracy. It seldom works out well.
Prefer Republican.
It doesn't matter what party. I'll tell you an anecdote because this fellow here told me that. As long as you vote for Republican, you're fine. I'll tell you a little anecdote. When I was a young feller still in the Army, my mother called me frantic. I was in Germany and she said, "Your grandfather's dying. You must come home immediately." I said, "Well, can you give me a Red Cross message? Because pretty sure that ain't gonna fly." "Well, he's not really dying, but he might die." Well, I said, yeah, I'm aware. It happens. But I caved and I got a little leave and I came back to the States and he wasn't dying. And then my mom springs on me, "You should buy your grandparents' farm." "Oh yeah, I'm a buck sergeant making $3 an hour. That should be no problem. Let me get my check." Well, we worked out the details and I ended up doing a closing at the lawyer's office, my grandparents' lawyers. My grandparents, I had two grandfathers, very different men. My grandfather on my father's side was staunch conservative, had been the prosecutor, the state's attorney in Illinois, as we call him. And my grandfather on my mother's side was a staunch Democrat, precinct committeeman, sheet metal worker, union fellow.
Blue collar.
I'm conflicted. So I'm sitting in the closing, and by this time, this lawyer, who was like 150 or something, says to me, "Your grandfather," my dad said, "and I ran against each other for state's attorney, and I beat him." And I said, "Oh, you must be a Democrat." Because, of course, my grandfather had been a Republican. And he said, Republican, Democrat, they're just a different brand of rascals. So don't drink the Kool-Aid, whatever flavor, okay? I'm pretty sure Governor Little, Brad, is a Republican, at least in name. I used to be one too, but then their party left me, so I'm not sure. I guess I'm a rhino or something. Anyhow, I digress. So let's not confuse Republican and Democrat as good guy and bad guy. Those labels are not applicable and they're not accurate, certainly not these days. What's the difference between a republic and a democracy? Well, let's look at the definition. Those words, democracy comes from the Greek words, people rule. Well, that doesn't sound so bad, right? And so democracy in a generic sense, where the people rule, that sounds pretty good. Well, how about republic? Well, that comes from the Latin words, res publica, a public thing. Let's contrast those things. People rule really plays out as majority rules, okay? That's what you get with democracy. Your rights are subject to a majority, okay? Your payment for that referendum, that levy, you have democracy to thank for that. In a republic, we, the citizens, own the thing. It's ours. Even if we're in the minority, the line shifts, right? Anybody check the ratio on presidential elections in recent history? Razor thin. So 49% today, 51 tomorrow, 49 the next day. Your rights are swinging and dangling in the wind. But in a republic, in our republic, in our constitutional public that's premised on God-given unalienable rights, you're safe. Whether you're in the majority or the minority today, your rights remain. In a democracy, they are always at risk. And it only takes, 50.0000001% of the vote, and you are in trouble. What you thought was okay isn't anymore. At the time of the founding and at the time of the framing of the Constitution, and please understand the difference between the founders and the framers, it's important, different set of fellows, some were the same. The framers didn't give democracy a second thought. It's the dumpster fire of political systems. As my children like to say, and as you probably all heard the anecdote or some version of it, democracy is two wolves and a sheep getting together and deciding on lunch. Right? That's what you get. But in our republic, the sheep is protected. You can't just chase the guy out of town and hang him at the nearest tree. You have to send the sheriff out to get him. You have to bring him back. You have to put him in the jail. You got to give him a trial. Then you hang him. Process. Good news for any of you in the audience who might be non-believers. America works for you too. The Constitution doesn't distinguish. Whether you believe in God or not, you get the benefit of the bargain. It's a sweet deal. I'd encourage you to rethink your position on that if you're not a believer, but you're still protected. Number 4, the U.S. Constitution, which includes what we refer to as the Bill of Rights. How many people stand up or wear hats and talk about their constitutional rights? Got bad news for you, you ain't got any. All the Constitution does is memorialize, put in writing, the rights you already have. Remember? They don't come from the government, they come from God. They don't come from the Constitution. You were born with them, just like your ancestors, even those before America. And oh, by the way, the ones listed in the so-called Bill of Rights isn't an all-inclusive, exhaustive list. Look at the 9th Amendment. What does it say? The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed or to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Homeschoolers, there's probably a few of you who do it in my house. It ain't in there. It's not enumerated. It's not mentioned. But guess what? It's an unalienable right. And even the Supreme Court, gasp, agrees. You have what they call a fundamental right, because they don't like to talk about God in the Supreme Court anymore. You have a fundamental right to direct the education of your children. They've said that in a number of cases over the last 100+ years. So, who gets on the Supreme Court matters. Whether you have the right and whether you can exercise it are not always synced up, right? The Constitution, Our U.S. Constitution is not a partisan document. There weren't Republicans and Democrats in 1787 when it was ratified. There were some folks that were later called Federalists and Anti-Federalists, but they weren't really parties. They were a bunch of smart guys with different opinions. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, our Constitution and our so-called Bill of Rights are based on universal truths. They're not party platforms. When I was foolish enough to run for office a few years ago, I was at one of these debates. Sometimes they call them candidate forums. It's just kind of a gentler term. And I had some schmo in the audience say, "Oh, you one of those Tea Partiers?" Like, I don't know, man. Are you? The thing about the Constitution is it's not just for Republicans or Democrats or whatever you are. It's for everybody. It's a good deal. If you like freedom, it's right up your alley. If you don't like freedom, I guess you might want to try to, mess with the Constitution. Number 5, limited government. I know, it sounds like an oxymoron. Remember, government has only those powers delegated to it by the people. That's us, right? They're our servants. It would behoove you to remind them of that from time to time as you pass by Heather on the way out. I'm sure to tell you. Government has exactly no more power than what we give it. Compare that with a unitary system like Canada. Any Canadians? They will admit it. In Canada, power flows from the top down. They don't have God baked into the Canadian cake. And when I say the top, I'm not talking about God, I'm talking about the national government there. Our system is the opposite. It flows from the people to the government. In Canada, the government can do virtually anything it pleases unless there's some explicit restriction. It's scary. In America, government can't do a doggone thing unless we say it can. Let that sink in a minute. How's that working out? In America, we dilute political power. We spread it out, we thin it down. We don't want it concentrated in one place. We have coexisting governments, not like the bumper sticker. States are sovereign, and so is the national government, right? We have a sovereign nation, we have sovereign states. What does that mean? Well, they get to make their own rules. Contrast that with counties and municipalities. Those are merely subdivisions of the state government. They're subordinate to the state governments. They can't go off the reservation, so to speak. We have federalism. I asked my wife, bless her heart, she's been a lawyer for almost 20 years. I said, honey, what's Freudianism? What's federalism? I go, we have work to do. Our national or federal government is limited only to the powers that we give it. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the so-called enumerated powers, lists out, depending on your math, about 18 powers. The jurisdiction of the federal government. It has a few other powers kind of scattered throughout the Constitution, like impeachment. Only Congress can do that. Only the Senate can try it, and we know how that, we've all got an exercise in that little civics lesson lately. But government is limited everywhere. That's the American system. We have limited jurisdiction at every level of government. Well, what's jurisdiction? We hear that all the time. Nobody seems to understand what the heck it means, particularly people in government. There are essentially two components of jurisdiction. Okay? There is subject matter jurisdiction, the topic we're talking about, and there's geographical jurisdiction, the place. So, the city of Priest River is a legal jurisdiction. It can make rules, but only in Priest River. The county is a jurisdiction, it can make rules only within its geographical boundaries, the state, so forth. Governments are supposed to stay in their own sandboxes. How's that working out? About 66% of the state of Idaho
It's run by the
is
federal
managed, I use the term loosely,
government.
by the federal government. In that 66% is a small percentage of the state's land that's managed by the state government. But think about that. We got rid of a king and the king's lands, and we traded that for the king's lands. Ugh. It's exasperating. Governments need to stay within their own sandboxes. The 10th Amendment, anybody ever read that one? It's one of the Bill of Rights, but it's not. It says the power is not delegated to the United States, the national government, what we usually call the federal government, by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states. So, you understand that clever language? So if it's not delegated to the national government, and it's not prohibited by the Constitution to the states, well, then it stays with the states and the people. That's us. So, let me just give you a quick, here's how political power works. Okay, this is how jurisdiction works. This is how federalism works. Here's the pie. That's political power. All of it comes from God and it's inherent in us. And then sometimes we think, well, it'd be a really good idea to delegate a little bit of that power out to government. To do what? To secure our unalienable rights. Because, you know, kind of hard to fight China all by ourselves. They got billions of people, right? So we get together and we throw a little political power to the federal government. But that pie to the federal government is just about hey, that much. And then we give some to the state government, you know, about that much. The rest of the pie is ours. And oh, by the way, we can take the pie back. Because it's ours. It's our pie. I should be a chef or a baker.
Bake the cake and bake the pie, huh?
How's the cake working? Have we baked it up just right? Is the pie a little lopsided these days?
Oh, come on.
What can you do? Heather touched on this. I get this question all the time. What can I do? I'm but a mere mortal. Well, we said the Pledge of Allegiance, right? Anybody did we all just say that from rote memory, or do we think about the words we were saying? I pledge allegiance. That's kind of like an oath, isn't it? I swear. I'm going to put my hand on my heart. To the flag of the United States of America.
To the Republic.
Okay, that's a symbol, right? We're not worshiping the flag. It's a symbol for the republic, you know, for which it stands. One nation,
Under God.
in pluribus unum, from many one, under, oh, there's that word,
God.
God, indivisible. That gets the states' rights folks a little upset sometimes. With liberty and justice for all. I love it. Words have meaning. Words matter. Every night, I can't sleep. I say it again, the Lord's Prayer. It's my therapy prayer. I always get hung up on that part where, you know, we say, forgive us our trespasses, God, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Wait, there's a qualifier. We want complete forgiveness from God, right? Oh, but then, you know, is it proportionate to our forgiveness of others? Words matter. Those words matter. There's a big difference between, you know, please God forgive me for everything, even if I won't forgive somebody else.
We did Jesus.
Is that just need it, just. What about this one? Words matter. The government. Who says that? Oh, the government's screwing us over again. Our government. See the difference? For Americans, it isn't about the government. That's not really a thing, is it? It's ours. We started this thing. We framed a constitution to say how we're going to run this thing, and we're the citizens of a republic. It's our thing. Right? Anybody ever heard of Mrs. Powell, Elizabeth Powell, 1L? Philadelphia socialite, circa 1787. Her husband had been the mayor of Philadelphia at one time. And, you know, Philadelphia was a hopping place, biggest city in the country in 1787. Nearly 40,000 people. Almost keeping up with Coeur d'Alene, you know. She was an interesting lady, a very influential lady. She was a good friend, she and her husband, with George and Martha Washington. She had been active throughout the Constitutional Convention, lobbying, hosting teas, hosting balls in her home to try to influence the delegates. And she had the ear of none other than George Washington, who was, you know, chairing the whole get-together. And at the conclusion of the Constitutional Convention in September of 1787, James McHenry, one of the delegates from Maryland, recorded in his diary an exchange between Elizabeth Powell and Benjamin Franklin, assuming everybody's heard of him. It goes like this. Mrs. Powell asked, "What have you given us, Dr. Franklin? A republic or a monarchy?" You'll note the two choices. Doesn't include democracy. To which Franklin replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." I'm guessing a lot of you in this room probably heard that before. Well, that's where it comes from. So that question about what can I do, well, I think Ben Franklin just answered it for you. His answer is the answer to the question, what can I do? Ask yourself. You don't have to answer out loud. But you're going to have to answer it at some point if you're going to keep your republic. Have you read the Bible? Have you read Matthew 22? Not the part I read earlier, but part 36 through 40, where Jesus is challenged by one of those pesky Pharisees, a lawyer, who says, more trickery, right? "Master, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus said unto him, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Now, let's be honest. I'm going to be. That first part, okay, that's pretty palatable. That second part, that's tough, right? It's kind of like the Lord's Prayer. We only get forgiveness to the extent we give forgiveness. It's not always easy to love your neighbor, especially when he's trying to trample on your unalienable rights. I'll save the sermon for another day on what loving your neighbor may actually require of you, but nonetheless, it's not always easy. It suffices to say. Have you read the Declaration of Independence? I gave you one. You had no excuse after tonight. It tells you what our credo is as a people. Have you read the U.S. Constitution and all of its 27 amendments? It created our national government as we know it today. Once you've read it, ask yourself, is that government functioning properly? Have you read the Idaho Constitution with all of its, wait for it, 133 amendments, it's a veritable dumpster fire. That's a legal term. Is that government functioning properly? Maybe Heather could weigh in on that a little bit. Spoiler alert. These documents are not written in code. Although the Declaration and U.S. Constitution were written in cursive. Just saying. You don't need somebody in a black dress to tell you what the words are or what they mean. You can read it. You have it in your hot little hands. You can understand it. And if you're not sure about some archaic term, you call me. I'll be happy to help you out. For example, Congress shall make no law. That's pretty unambiguous, isn't it? Shall not be infringed. Not particularly vague or confusing. A Republican form of government, not easily confused with a Democratic form of government. There's no asterisk in the Declaration next to unalienable rights. I don't think. Check my work. There's no footnote that allows for exceptions during so-called extreme emergencies or pandemics. It's not in there. The relationship between the people and our governments are master-servant relationships. The people are the masters, and the folks we choose to represent us in our governments are our servants. That's the design, that's the deal. Please remind them of that frequently. Have you educated your children, your grandchildren, on the content and importance of all those documents we've been talking about? The Bible, the Declaration, the Constitutions. Have you taught them to read and write in cursive so they can, divine what those things say? The answer to the question, what can I do, is not elusive. It requires no magical powers, no silver bullet, no Ovaltine secret decoder ring. Shout out to Christmas Story. Here's the Socratic method coming at you fast and furious. Are you registered to vote? I can check. You can check. You can go to the Secretary of State's website and I can tell if you're pulling my leg. You can pull the other one. In and of itself, voting is insufficient. You must do more. It is, however, an indispensable requirement of maintaining a republic. You can't very well choose your representatives if you don't, choose your representatives. Do you know who your county commissioners are? Your U.S. representatives and senators, your district and magistrate judges, your sheriff, school board trustees, library district trustees, hospital district trustees. They're all spending your money. Some of them like drunken sailors. Should you, it's our republic, should you allow them to remain in office? Do you know the name of your precinct that you live in? Do you know the name of your precinct committeeman? Do you research candidates before voting? Have you ever scheduled a sit-down with any of your representatives? Have you ever run for office? Ever made a campaign contribution? It doesn't take much, you guys. You can get their cell numbers for very little money. What's the going rate? No, I think you can get a county commissioner or county board member for $1,000. You can get complete access, trust me. It's a lot of beer money, but it might be worth it. Have you ever put a sign in your yard? Don't tell me if you've torn one down. I don't want to know about it. Have you ever made phone calls to promote a candidate? Have you ever written letters to the editors of newspapers on behalf of a candidate or a cause? You ever promoted candidates on social media? Ever promoted political or educational events like this one on social media? You ever participated in a recall election? Bet there's some petitions floating around. You ever filed a lawsuit to protect your unalienable rights? It requires explaining to a judge what that term means, but I'll help you if you need. Have you ever written a bill for your legislator to present to the legislature? Or asked your representative to seek the repeal of a bad law? That'd be a full-time job. Have you ever promoted the impeachment of an impeachable government officer? Do you know who they are? Which ones can be impeached? Some can be impeached and recalled. Are you taking free money from the state or federal government, knowing full well that there may be strings attached? Proceed with caution. If you're a peace officer, are you following unconstitutional orders? Have you ever attended a school board meeting, library board meeting, hospital board, commissioners, central committee, planning and zoning, city council? Have you ever spoken up or spoken out at one of those meetings? Are you complying with or defying facially and patently unconstitutional orders from the governor and the director of our Department of Health and Welfare? Are you going to church or staying home? Ah, you probably won't get it. Are you going to work or are you staying home? Are you researching businesses to see if they're open and showing their support for them by patronizing their establishments? Are you frequenting businesses, giving them your money voluntarily, if they openly oppose and are hostile to your values and beliefs? Have you ever traded principles for comfort and convenience? Have you walked away from a wrong without making it right? Have you allowed yourself to be manipulated by the self-promoting hustlers who claim to be patriots? You may know some of them. I know lots of them. There's money to be made in that shtick. Have you taken mere political lip service at face value? Have you made yourself financially and economically vulnerable by pursuing shiny objects to the point where you now need that free money from the government? Have you read political party platforms? Have the people for whom you voted in the past honored and battled for the planks in those platforms? If they haven't, assuming you know what platforms say, have you actively sought to hold them accountable or replace them? Governor Little, Brad, he's a conservative Republican. Is he now? Is he? Have you read the party platform of his political party? So what can you do? See the trick question there? I rattled off, I think, 30 or 40 things.
Yeah.
That's what you can do. A whole lot. You have to participate. Voting is simply not enough. And some aren't doing that, right? You must be present to win. Whether America is still salvageable, I honestly don't know. I want it to be in my heart. I'm fearful. But what I do know is that a machine generally doesn't fix itself. We must understand the machine that is our republic in order to fix it. Hopefully I have helped you along in that just a wee bit tonight. Should we let it go away? Be replaced by Lord knows what? Without doing our part? It's ours, after all, to fix it and maintain it. Look under the hood, folks. Get the tools you need, give her a tune-up, change the oil, fix the leaks, right? think there's probably a few more miles left in this rate. But I'm sure Heather will echo the sentiment. There is a lot of work to be done. I think you guys coming out here tonight is a good first step. Do we deserve it? Have we done our part? Did we sell America down the road? Can you keep it? Can you keep our republic? It's yours. You decide. That's what I got.